Friday, Baylor College of Medicine and Friends of Baylor. First of all, I would like to thank everyone who has been sending in emails and making comments on the video. Appreciate all your comments. Also want to thank the Chow family for check out those beautiful flowers. Really appreciate that. Thank you all. So today is really interesting because I think we needed a theme. So today's theme is the good, the bad, and the ugly. One of my favorite movies, and with Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef, who is the best kind of mean cowboy ever. And I forgot Eli Wallach played a Mexican bandit. And he's Jewish, which reminded me it wasn't a bad week to be Jewish this week, because not only is John Goldsmith back to being the most interesting man in the world, but the Hughes brothers. Quinn won the overtime game against Sweden, and Jack won the overtime game against Canada for the Americans at the gold medal in hockey. So anyway, so here's the good. As I said, it has the theme. The good, everyone has been searching for a broadly effective vaccine. And what we normally do traditionally is we take one particular protein or peptide or a little domain from a virus or bacteria, whatever, and we give that and vaccinate. Sometimes we'll add 2 or 3 or 4. A trivalent vaccine or a quadrivalent vaccine means that there are 4 different antigens. But we have never had something that's really universal. So some investigators at Stanford published in Science this past week in a really, really interesting study, which I want to share with you. So what they did is a mouse model, and they used a nose drop. So they wanted to induce mucosal immunity. And it was all these things they packaged in a liposome. And the liposome is how we deliver the mRNA vaccine. So interesting technology there. And what they delivered in this liposome to the nose was a couple of things that stimulate the immune system broadly. They're called toll-like receptors. They originally identified in flies. But what they do are their pattern recognition. They see patterns of damaged cells or microbes, and they induce an immune response. And an immune response, it's called Th1, but it's one specifically to stimulate the immune system to fight off things like invading viruses or bacteria. So in this liposome, they put in these alarm bells, but they also added a very benign placeholder antigen. In this case, it was albumin. So what the response of these mice was, it stimulated a very strong CD4 and CD8, big immune response to this. And these T cells that were stimulated by the liposome actually went and educated macrophages, which are resident in various tissues that are sort of immune effectors. And they stimulated them so well that when another antigen was given, like a virus or bacteria or something, they got an immune response within 3 days rather than 2 weeks. Now that is pretty amazing in and of itself, but not only did the protection last for more than 3 months in the mice, reduced disease, but no matter what was given, whether it was SARS, other coronaviruses, 2 different forms of bacterial infections or allergens, they all responded fast. And so this is the first time that I've seen that you have a pretty benign thing that just sort of turns on the immune system and gets it prepared for other antigens. So it's like priming the immune system for anything that comes. And so that is a really fascinating idea, and if it works, it could lead to a broadly protective strategy for vaccination. So that was really an awesome study. I hope it's repeatable. I hope it works in humans. Okay, that was the good. The bad is measles continues to persist. We're no doubt going to lose our disease-free status because it's been longer than a year. We are not yet endemic, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about measles later. And now for the ugly. So Nature magazine reporters found some internal emails that were sent to the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease staff telling them to remove the words biodefense and pandemic preparedness from the institution's websites. And the new directive from the NIH director, Dr. Bhattacharya, is to de-emphasize things like biodefense and pandemic preparedness, to focus on the immune response to the current pathogens we have and not to worry about future diseases. That is like the ostrich sticking their head underground, because the problem is that all these emerging pathogens occur all over the world, not in the United States, and we're all subject to them. And if we don't prepare to deal with them or even aren't aware of them, are like dropping out of the WHO that keeps all the information on that. All that's going to do, it's not going to be consistent with the Make America Healthy agenda. It's going to be make us more unprepared and susceptible to future pandemics. So that, to me, was the ugly of the week. Well, let's see what's happening. So in Texas, it's really interesting. The only things that are increasing are RSV, we've talked about it, and metapneumovirus. Pretty much everything else is falling. Influenza A and B is decreasing. SARS-CoV-2 remains pretty low. Adenovirus and noroviruses are decreasing. So that's good for Texas. And let's talk about what's happening nationally. So every time I talk about measles, I show this because we eliminated measles as a disease in 2000. Those were the days. So what's happened the last week? We're up to 982 cases. We were 733 the week before, so over 100 and almost 150 cases. 97% of the patients are either unvaccinated or undervaccinated. So all these could be eliminated by vaccine. We're almost 1,000 cases in just 2 months. 4% of those have been hospitalized, so 38 cases, 38 poor people have been hospitalized because of measles. And as I showed you before, there's weekly cases by rash onset. We're now over a year, which means we should lose our elimination status. We don't know when they'll declare it endemic. Endemic means it just continues on through the years, but we could even become an endemic country, which would be a shame. The hotspots remain South Carolina and Utah, 632 cases in South Carolina, 117 in Utah, 64 in Florida, and my grandson's state, it's up to, my wife and I, we still debate this, it's up to 17. They haven't got him vaccinated yet because that's the standard, what they're saying, but I would. He'll be 7 months soon, so if they make it another month, maybe they'll do it at 8 months. So this is a map of vaccination status. So the dark brown means the least vaccinated, light brown second least. So anything under 95% is brown or tan, and that's not good enough for measles. You remember we've talked about the R0 being 18. It has to be 95% or more. So you can see hotspots in Florida, in South Carolina, Arizona, all under-vaccinated states. Not surprising if you're under 95%. The one thing I wanted to point out is that even in Texas, there are communities. So even the states that are 95% more, there may be communities in which the vaccination rate is low. And that happened in California before. They've had measles outbreaks in Marin County, but Marin County people realized that was not good, and now they're one of the higher vaccination communities. Yearly measles case, in 2 months, we're almost halfway to where we were last year. So there's no question we're going to beat last year, not in a good way. Anyway, that's too bad. All right, flu is interesting. It's still high. The weekly hospitalization rate peaked at week 52. That is so consistent. At week 52, it generally is high. It's the second highest peak since the 2010-2011 season. So it's the highest in 15 years. Children under the age of 18 had the highest peak since 2010-11. So they're really struggling. The pediatric deaths brought the season, there were 5 more pediatric deaths last week, brought the season high to 71. So, even though it's late in the season, I'd still get vaccinated if you haven't been vaccinated. So far, the CDC says there's been 24 million illnesses, 310,000 hospitalizations, and 20,000 deaths. Flu's a bad disease. No avian flu reported, but in talk about we don't want to pay attention to anybody else. There were 3 cases of avian flu reported in China in December and January. So, we need to know these things so we're prepared. Interesting about the influenza, it's been predominantly influenza A all season, and not only influenza A, it's been that subclade K, but influenza B is now increasing, so as a percentage and in total number of cases. That happens usually late in the season. One particular variety of influenza, it dominates, and then late in the season, it moves to a different one. As I said before, H3N2 subclade K has been the most frequent influenza A, and this influenza B is Victoria strain. You remember Yamagata was eliminated disappeared during COVID, and we'll see what happens. I had mentioned that we were looking to see if we get a second peak in influenza. Last season, 24-25, there were these 2 peaks. It peaked in the 52nd week as it's typical, but we had this late season peak, late January, early February. This season, it doesn't seem to be doing that. So this season seems to be following a lot like previous seasons. So I'm hopeful we won't have another spike in influenza. COVID remains low. It's in the wastewater, so it's not gone, but it remains pretty low in disease. And I mentioned the travelers data last week, but the travelers data is still pretty low. So worldwide, or at least the people coming into those major sites in the United States are still low. In the worldwide view, it's 62% remain XFG, but this NB 1.8.1, which I talked about last week, is still at a pretty high 15%. And I said last week we'd watch to see, because that surprised me. NB 1.81 was like last year's Nimbus. I thought it would disappear, but in the United States even, and Nimbus is coming back up. It's about 21% of the strains. And so from an evolutionary perspective, most of the evolution of the viruses have moved up this particular route to the K flirt variants, and then this was the target for this past year's COVID. Nimbus was something that happened sort of early 23 and 24, but it's emerging again as a major variant. So we'll have to look and see whether the competition between this area or this area becomes the dominant one. Anyway, pretty interesting. So people were concerned about COVID vaccines. There's just a recent study that was presented at the Society of Maternal-Fetal Medicine that looked at 434 children who were born to mothers who were vaccinated during pregnancy or just before pregnancy or not vaccinated. Followed them for 18 months and 30 months for signs of autism. No difference whatsoever. So that seems to be safe. The other thing that is an interesting Washington Post article that actually quoted an article in JAMA that is saying, like, what happens, they're sort of predicting what happens if the current feelings about vaccine persist and our numbers continue to drop. You know, we're talking about measles all the time. There are a lot of other diseases that are going to be a problem. So they mentioned, you know, we eliminated measles in 2020. It's back. Pertussis, whooping cough, is a real problem. It's never been eliminated. It can be fatal in children. In cases that were 6 times higher in 24 than 23, and they continue to increase. Again, this is preventable by vaccination. Meningitis is absolutely one of the worst diseases. I've been unfortunate to see several kids, college-age kids, who came in with meningitis, lost limbs. A couple, I've seen deaths from meningitis. Those cases have been increasing since 2021. The CDC removed that as a recommendation for vaccination. Absolutely, I just think that's the dumbest thing in the world. You look at polio. People are concerned if the vaccination declines by 50% or so. The study reported that we could have 4.3 million cases per year by 2050. I mean, polio is a devastating disease, and yet, you know, this concern about vaccination. I mentioned last week, 20% of people aren't convinced they should get a polio vaccine. That's in the Kaiser surveys. Rotavirus vaccine was introduced in 2006. Before then, almost every child had it. Since that vaccine eliminated, and the vaccine is no longer recommended. RSV, we talked about this year. Big step forward. It's really tough on infants, particularly 6 months of age. Vaccines no longer recommended. That to me, again, just puts poor, kids under the age of 1 year at great risk. Tetanus, we pretty much, have had a very effective vaccine. Coverage is, so the concern is, once again, if you don't get your booster, you'll be susceptible. Rubella, hepatitis is another one. Hepatitis B, we started doing vaccination for them, eliminated 99% of the cases in infants, no longer recommended by the CDC. It's just sad. Anyway, on the good news, I want to send some shout outs to some people for good news. Congratulations, Dr. Bo Yan, Associate Professor in Human Genome Sequence Center, who received the 2026 Dr. Michael Watson Genetic and Genomic Medicine Innovation Award for the discovery and characterization of multiple novel genetic disorders. So congratulations to him. This week we celebrate National Thank a Resident Day, when medical schools and hospitals collectively show their appreciation for our resident physician and fellows. Those are the training. After you graduate from medical school, you go be a resident, and then if you want to go a subspecialist, you do a fellow. These people are very, very important for managing the care of patients in an academic institution. Very appreciative of them. And then finally, next Thursday is the annual Henry J. N. Taub and James K. Alexander Medical Student Research Symposium, where medical students will present original research in basic science, education research, Health System Science and Clinical Disciplines. There'll be a reception in the Razor Lounge. I hope many of the faculty can come and look at this, the research done by our students. Anyway, hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I can't wait to see you next week.